Hello everybody and welcome to Eddzshed. Today we are going to be taking a look at Total War Warhammer. Don't forget that there's new Total War Warhammer videos on this channel every Wednesday, and this video is going to be on the Dwarfs. This is going to be a very brief overview video, and we won't go into too much detail on any of the particular units, but we will just, as I say, just have a broad overview on all of the different aspects of the army. So one of the first things to note about the Dwarfs, and to be honest, one of the things that I dislike the most about the Dwarfs, is their complete lack of mobility and a lack of cavalry. And I think that this really limits what they're capable of, and I think that this forces you into an overly defensive playstyle, and it's very difficult to assault the enemies as Dwarfs. You also, or one of the things that I found is that the unit types tend to contain less people, or less dwarfs than, say, an orc unit will contain orcs. And don't get me wrong, it's made up for by the fact that they're very heavily armoured and very tough, but it can mean that stretching your line out to counter these artillery charges and to try and prevent yourself from getting flanked is very difficult, and you tend to find yourself falling victim to cavalry and just being ran off the battlefield by it. So one of the first things to look at with the Dwarfs is their artillery, and this is probably going to be one of the things that has actually drawn you to play the Dwarfs in the first instance. So they've got available to them cannons, flame cannons, grudge throwers and onager guns. Now, I'm probably saying the onager gun name wrong, but this is going to be the first thing that I look at, because this should be the peak of artillery in Total War Warhammer, but it really isn't. It will decimate through very lightly armoured units, such as goblins, but if you're trying to use this on, for instance, the Black Orcs, then it's no use. It's not as effective as it should be, and unfortunately this is pretty much going to be the theme of the video, when nothing in the Dwarf army feels as good as it should be. When you consider the lack of mobility it's got, it makes being on the offensive almost impossible. The flame cannons, they're very good, but the units or the enemies need to be very close to the flame cannons for it to be effective. And usually they only get off one jet of flames before they've been enveloped and crushed. And you obviously can't put your units in front of the flame cannons, or you're going to have roast dwarfs on your front line. It's a similar story again with the cannons, but the cannons I suppose make up for it because they're not as expensive and they are just designed to take out large targets. The grudge throwers, however, they're okay because they will fire over your units, but they're only okay and not great because there's no real splash damage to them. It's not like the fell cannon. The fell cannon that the Chaos has is phenomenal, and I was really hoping that the Dwarfs would have something comparable to that, but they just don't seem to. So that sums up probably the thing I'm most disappointed with about the Dwarfs. And I know it's not a great way to start the video, but it's something that either needs to be changed, or you're also going to be disappointed with the Dwarfs, and I certainly wouldn't play them in a multiplayer battle because it's just too difficult. You could possibly get away with them being purely artillery based if your friends could support your flanks and prevent anybody from getting too close to you. Okay, so looking at the Dwarf melee infantry, you've got some very good units here, and none of them feel particularly expendable as you find with other races. You've got the Dwarf Warriors, and the Dwarf Warriors with great weapons, along with the miners and miners with blasting charges making up probably the core of your army. The miners with blasting charges will throw their blasting charges and not be as effective once the enemy has closed in on them. The Dwarf Warriors will stand their ground for a long period of time, and with great weapons are very effective at doing so. They can also dole out a significant amount of damage, but they are slow. All dwarf units are very slow, so it makes being on the offensive quite difficult. You've then got hammerers, and hammerers are fantastic damage dealers. They're not quite the same as the slayers, where they're very good at taking down big enemies. They're not an anti-large unit, but they can be used very effectively to defeat other, for instance, Empire swordsmen, or skeleton warriors. They're very good at that because they can dole out this great amounts of damage when they're engaged. The other unit that you've got, which is very sort of counter infantry, I suppose, in your own infantry, is the Longbeards. Longbeards also serve to boost the leadership of units nearby to them. They in fact act like slightly weaker versions of the general, and this can obviously be if they're spaced in between each of your units, then it gives a massive boost to your front line and makes it a lot less likely to retreat or fold. They're also a very potent fighting unit and can certainly hold their own against most other infantry types. The final type of infantry that you've got is the Slayers, and this is something that you're probably all aware of because, you know, they were very much branded as being counter large, but whilst they will fight large units to their last breath, and they're not bad at doing so, they're not great either. You know, I feel like some of the spearman type units, halibuts, etc., are much better and much better equipped to take out larger units than the Dwarf Slayers. But the fact that they won't break and run away makes them a fantastic unit in their own right, because they will just keep going, and leadership is probably the most crucial stat and the most undervalued stat in Total War, certainly from my point of view anyway. So the next thing to look at is their missile infantry. Now you've got Quarrelers, which are just I think they throw axes or something. I'm not entirely sure what they're throwing at the enemy, but they seem to throw something at them. I think some of them have crossbows as well, depending on what type you've got. I haven't really used them much. They seem mediocre. I think I've used them just to flesh out armies in the past. It's not something I've used a massive amount. So I can't really speak on them, but they're just an okay sort of ranged unit. Now, the next type of missile infantry you've got is the Thunderers. Now, these I do like an awful lot. They are a very potent ranged unit and can dole out tremendous amounts of damage, but they do suffer from the fact that they're a ranged unit, and if enemies can close on them, the enemies are going to do an awful lot of damage to them. They're not as good at fighting in melee as, for instance, the Iron Drakes, which we'll get to in a minute, but equally they're not as bad as, for instance, the Empire Bowmen. Now you can use the Britonian Bowmen. Now you can of course use the Thunderers by getting them onto the enemy flanks, and that will allow you to continue to crossfire into them when your melee units are engaged, and that's probably the best use of these particular types. Now, you've also got the Iron Drakes. You've got two different types. You've got Trollhammer torpedoes and you've got the ones with flamers. In my opinion, the flamers don't feel overly useful because of the limitations on range and the fact that the enemies will close in pretty quickly. It's nice to maybe have one or two in there, but you don't want to try and torch an entire goblin army. They're just simply not capable of doing that. As I say, quite a good unit, but I don't feel they're worth the expense, because they are quite an expensive unit. Now, the Trollhammer torpedoes, on the other hand, these are fantastic units. These are one of the dwarf units that really do stand out, and I really like. You put these near the centre and you wait for various large units such as Terrorgeists, etc. to try and smash through your centre, and these guys will take them down, and they can take them down from range, so you can tie them up with Slayers and fire your Trollhammer torpedoes into them, and you're going to take them down, and that makes them one of the standout units for me when it comes to the dwarfs. The next sort of thing to look at is the gyrocopters. You've got various different ones. You've got steam guns, brimstone guns, gyrocopter bombers. They're all pretty much the same. Some drop bombs, others shoot stuff from the air. They're a very good air unit. You know, they're obviously not as tough as a steam tank from the Empire, but they're a very tough air unit and can dole out a lot of damage, and whilst archers can fire upon them, it will take an awful lot to bring these down. There has to be a concerted effort to actually bring one of these down, which means that you are pretty much at liberty with these to assault the enemy anywhere you like, and the gyrocopter bomber can do tremendous amounts of damage if you get the bombs timed right, going over an enemy. Okay, so finally, to just take a quick look at the lords that you can have. You've got High King Thorgrim Grudgebearer. I haven't got a massive amount to say about either of the legendary lords. Thorgrim, when I've used him in armies, tends to have a lot more stuff to boost the army's morale. Is okay, but I would always pick Ungrim Iron Fist, which is the Slayer King. And the reason that I would pick him is because he will not rout at all. And there has been points when he's single-handedly holding back a massive tide of enemies, and he's phenomenal. I can't say much more than that, but he will stand his ground to the absolute last. He will die in battle as opposed to a retreat at any point, and he can be used to pin far more units than he's worth down, and he will hold his own in there for a significant amount of time. So I hope you've liked this video. I know it's been quite short, quite wishy-washy in points because it's just a brief overview, but please do subscribe. There will be far more detailed videos coming out every Wednesday, so don't forget to check back then, and there'll be different battle plans and more detailed guides into using each of the units, and also a look at some of the tips and tricks I've got for winning on the campaign map. So yeah, please do like and subscribe and all those things, and hopefully I will see you next time.